Music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with yours truly, Tom Alvarez. Featured on today's episode is Ramón Flowers, Assistant Professor in the Department of Dance at Butler University's Jordan College of the Arts. Join me now as I go on the aisle in a conversation with Ramón. Welcome, Ramón Flowers. I'm so happy that we were able to facilitate this interview, and I'm so happy to have you on my podcast. I've run into you several times and said, "Oh, you got to be on my podcast." You know how that goes. So, in preparation for this interview, I went back and I read the wide-ranging interview that we did on my website for my listeners. I have to take the time to mention more often and promote my website column on the aisle with Tom Alvarez, which has become my quote brand. And I see that we sat down in your office at Butler University, where you are a professor of dance, and that was October 2018. Can you believe that?
Wow.
It's been
Time
that
has
long.
flown, yes.
And you had just completed like your third semester. And
Yes.
so I thought, what fun. I mean, a lot of water has passed under the bridge since then, right?
Yes, a lot. I've been promoted to associate professor and I got tenure since then. So, yes, a lot.
Congratulations. How does
Thank you.
that feel?
It feels fantastic.
Isn't that what educators at your level strive for, to get tenure so that you don't have to worry about moving around?
Yes, absolutely. It's a major accomplishment. There's a lot that
Yeah.
goes into it, but once you receive tenure and promotion, it lets you know that they see your worth.
And you're validated.
Yes.
Give me a brief update. You came to Butler from Iowa City, Iowa, where you had received your MFA in dance. Is that correct?
That is
Prior
correct.
to that, you danced all over the world with major ballet companies. You danced on Broadway. I remember learning about you from our mutual friend, David Hochoy. He said, wait till you talk to Ramón. I don't think people here realize what his background is and how fortunate we are to have him in this community. So let's go back and give my listeners a sort of a thumbnail sketch of your career.
Oh, well, first of all, I want to thank our mutual friend, David Ho Choi, for such a glowing introduction to who I am. Well, yes, so I started in the Pennsylvania Ballet Company as a concert dancer. It's now called the Philadelphia Ballet. There, I was the first African American male ever to be hired in the company, so I kind of made history there. So from there, I moved to Europe and danced with Maurice Béjart. He's a French choreographer who founded a company called the Ballet du XXe siècle in French, but it's the ballet of the 20th century. It was in Brussels, Belgium, but then we moved to Lausanne, Switzerland, and we became Béjart Ballet Lausanne, and that's what they are known as now. Then I moved to Frankfurt, Germany to work with William Forsythe's company at the time, and it was the Frankfurt Ballet. From there, I moved to Spain and worked with Nacho Duato's company, La Compañía Nacional de Danza de España, when he was the director. And then I went to Le Grand Ballet Canadien in Montreal, Canada. From there, I went to Broadway and stayed for 11 years. So I don't know if you want me to mention all of my Broadway credits, but
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
okay, so
Yeah.
I made my Broadway debut in Matthew Bourne's Swan Lake. It's the one where the men are the swans, and it's having a resurgence. I know they're doing it in London at the moment.
Oh, really? Okay. Uh-huh.
Yes, and it's come back to the States many times, but it premiered and had its US debut on Broadway. And Matthew Bourne, as a matter of fact, won 2 Tony Awards for that show. At the time, that wasn't considered a musical. So he won Best Director of a Musical and Best Choreographer of a Musical for Swan Lake. Then I went into Cats, the original production. I wasn't in the original cast, but I was in the production before it closed and was revived, because it was revived maybe about 5 or so years ago. So I was in the original production of Cats just before it closed. Then I went into Julie Taymor's production of The Green Bird. Most people don't know of that show because it didn't last long. And from there, I moved into The Lion King on Broadway. From The Lion King, I did The Boy from Oz with Hugh Jackman. And then I went into a new production with Earth, Wind, and Fire's music and choreography and concept from Maurice Hines, Gregory Hines' brother. And that was called Hot Feet. And then I toured nationally with Chita Rivera in A Dancer's Life. So there's my career in a nutshell.
And it's extraordinary. You know, I covered theater, music, and dance for a long time, and I try to get to Broadway a couple times a year. So I'm quite familiar with your body of work, and of course the ballet companies that you mentioned and such. And so, that's a very sterling resume, my friend. I mean, truly. I remember running into you a couple of times. As I said, we run into each other occasionally. And I've seen you at a couple of Broadway touring shows that have come to town. And I recall that in each case, you knew people in the chorus, you knew dancers, and you
Yes.
probably have these connections all over Hella Creation, do you not?
I do. As a matter of fact, Moulin Rouge was just here, and one of my friends and former colleagues was in that production. And we had Hadestown here not long ago, and I knew, a few people, some of the stars, and my really dear friend, Tony Award winner Renee Elise Goldsberry was just in
Oh,
Carmel
yes.
months ago. So yeah, and we
And
reconnected.
she originated the role in Hamilton, right?
Angelica, yes,
Yeah.
yes. She won a Tony for that role. So
Wow.
our connection is The Lion King. She was Nala
Hmm.
at some point when I was on Broadway doing The Lion King. And then
Oh,
she went on to do wonderful things on television and film and winning Tony Awards. And yeah.
wow, you've had many, many, many pinch me moments, have you not?
I have, yes. And I used to take them for granted, but I don't anymore,
Uh-huh.
because I just worked hard and I knew what I wanted. I went for it. And I wasn't surprised when I got them until I compared my career to some other people's who wish that they had done at least one of the things that I've
Oh
done.
my
So
goodness. Did you not originate the role of Richie in Chorus Line as well?
what I was a part of the original production's national tour.
I see.
But
Gotcha.
that was my first job. It was like I quit college to do Richie in a chorus line, but it was the national tour. But I didn't originate the role. Ron Dennis originated the Broadway production. Maybe the confusion for some people, the way I write it, is that I was a part of the original, because they did a revival of a chorus line as well.
Got it.
And so, not knowing my age, people may think that I might be too young to
Gotcha.
have been a part of the original production. So,
Gotcha.
just like with Cats, I wasn't a part of the original cast,
Yeah.
but I was a part of the original
Well, the reason
production.
I brought that up is because, you're an example of like art imitating life. That show was all about dancers wanting to get a break. And,
Yes,
you live that life.
absolutely.
You
Yes.
were a
And
gypsy.
yes.
And remind me about Richie's character. I started watching the film the other night and I still have to finish it out. It's been a long time and, it's timeless, of course, right?
Yes.
So who was Richie? Tell me.
Well, the film, I just want to add that, and nothing against the people who created the film, Michael Bennett never wanted that show to become a film, mainly because he
Oh,
thought that if Hollywood got a hold of it, they would just ruin it. And
Yeah,
in my opinion, they did. Because what he was trying to achieve with a chorus line is giving dancers a voice,
correct.
to let people in on the backstories of dancers. And there is a documentary sort of film of the making of
Yes,
the revival. Now,
correct.
that is called Every Little Step. I'm actually in that movie. And if Michael Bennett were alive when that one was made, I think he would have approved of that one because that's the closest thing to what he was trying to achieve with the Broadway production of A Chorus
Yeah.
Line.
To tell you the truth, that, I kind of lost interest in the film, and I don't know that I'll go back to it because films open up the story, of course. They shoot
Yes.
at other locations and such. I mean, it's theatrical and it takes place in the theater. It's about the theater. So to
Hmm.
open it up that way, it just didn't work for me.
Yeah. So, and that's probably why Michael Bennett didn't want it to be a,
Same thing with
sorry.
Hair. Remember Hair when they opened Hair up in the movie? It was a completely different experience, the
Well,
musical.
I only knew it, I knew it first as a film. And so that's the unfortunate reality, depending on how you're introduced to a production. Because, like, for this generation, all they know is A Chorus Line, the movie. Most of them hadn't seen the Broadway production. So for
Yes.
them, it was fabulous, and that's all they know. But if
Yeah.
your first experience was the live production, or if you were part of it, even more so,
Yeah.
seeing that film, you're just like, oh my God, like
Yeah. Well,
what
we
is
could go
this?
on and on and on about movie treatments and musicals, including Wicked. I hope to think that people who are introduced to movie musicals will end up in real theaters to see live musicals. I don't know if anybody's done research on that, but it's better than them not experiencing musicals at all, I would say, right?
Absolutely. And
Because they put
also, we have to
dancers to
think.
work.
Yeah, and we also have to think about resources because some of us do have the luxury of being able to afford to see a live
Yes,
production, but Broadway is very, very, very expensive
and
and way
getting
out of
more
some
so.
people's keys. And so even film sometimes now going to the movies is not as cheap as it used to be when I was growing up. So already it's not so easy for some people to even see the movie these days.
Mhm.
But at least they get, as you said, like some sort of experience with movie musicals or musicals, however they can get it. But it's unfortunate for those who only experience one versus the other, and that's the only thing they have to go by.
And also, I think it's a positive, as I said before, it's putting dancers to work and artists, actors
Yes.
and scene designers and costume designers, and a lot of those folks who are in those film versions, came from Broadway because of their experience and all. So it's all good, from that standpoint. But let's back up. Why did you transition from ballet to Broadway?
Interesting question. Actually, it was the other way around. And most people would think it was the way you just presented it. But I was in college as a speech theater communications major because I wanted to do Broadway. While I was in college, before I left, so this is when I quit college. So I was in college at Glassboro State College, and now it's Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey. And from there, I had to take movement for the actor. And in that class was where I realized I was an innate dancer. And that teacher pushed me to take more dance classes. So each teacher that I had at Glassboro State kind of pushed me to do more of something in dance. And what that led me to was ballet because there was a jazz teacher who had a company. Her name is Diane Hull. And she would do bits from Broadway hits in her company. So I got to experience Broadway snippets, if you will, an introduction to Broadway through her company. But one of the things she said to me is that I had this raw, natural talent that needed to be cleaned up with ballet. So I wasn't interested in ballet at all. I was just doing ballet to be a better Broadway dancer, if you will. So
Interesting.
I took my first ballet class, and that teacher was a former principal dancer with the Pennsylvania Ballet. And he pushed me as far as he thought he could push me in a college setting and asked me to consider going to the Pennsylvania Ballet School. I got a full scholarship. Long story short, I improved so quickly that after I don't even think it was a year. I did one summer intensive, and the director at the time, Benjamin Harkavy, offered me an apprenticeship. So it's like, I'm being offered these jobs, but at the same time, I was still in college, and I went up to New York and auditioned for a chorus line. I also, once I realized I wanted to dance, I wanted to be in a more of a conservatory university if I'm going to do this for a degree. So I thought, I want to go to Juilliard. So I auditioned for Juilliard and a chorus line. And then I was offered this contract to dance at the Pennsylvania Ballet as an apprentice. I got all three. I turned down Juilliard's full scholarship and I turned down Pennsylvania Ballet initially because I was like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I went to an open call for a chorus line and I got the job. And so I got my equity card from one audition. And Mr. Harkavy said to me, I had, as Richie, I was a principal in a Broadway tour. And principals only get a 6-month contract, and it's renewable every 6 months if they like you, or maybe that's their way of getting rid. It's easier to get rid of principals when you are in the ensemble. You sign a run of the play contract, so it's more difficult to be fired or gotten rid of. So if the show runs like The Lion King, you could be in that show, or like Phantom. Some people stay with Phantom from the beginning until it closed, like 14 or 18 years later, because they couldn't be fired. And it was a good job. And it's like, who wants to leave a good job? So I say all this to say,
Imagine that, having your whole career focused on one show. My
oh, I
career
know.
was a Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah. I
I've
can't
never heard
personally
of that.
imagine, but I know of someone who did.
Did their body hold up to do that? I mean,
Yeah, because she was smart and she understood how to keep her body together. She took class. So Marlene Danielle, she's in the Guinness Book of Records for
oh
the
wow,
most performances in the same show. She opened and closed Cats on
that's
Broadway.
oh
So
wow,
that was like 18 years in the same show. But going back to your question about how did I get from, well, you thought it was ballet
yeah,
to
right.
Broadway. So Mr. Harkavy told me to continue to take ballet while I was doing a chorus line. And then after the 6 months, if I wanted to come back and take him up on his offer to join the company, I could do that. So I had my experience of doing the same thing 8 times a week, going back to what you said, like not imagining how you can do. And this is only 6 months. So I did 6 months of a chorus line, the same thing over and over. And for me, at the time, I was young and talented, and I wasn't challenged enough doing the same thing 8 times a week. So I wanted to do what I considered real dance
Mhm.
and dance in a company, like to do concert dance and get the real dance, as I put it, out of my system. Because I noticed that when I was doing the Broadway tour, that almost everyone in my cast was older. They were like in their 40s. I was like the youngest person in the company. And so it made me realize, hey, I can have a ballet career and then do Broadway later, make a lot more money and do a lot less work. So that's how I ended up doing the reverse of what you thought. I did Broadway or a Broadway tour, then I went to ballet, and then when I was ready to retire as a ballet dancer, I thought now I can go and do Broadway.
That's interesting. You've had a very strategic career, have you not?
I did because speaking of strategy,
Very smart, I might add.
yes, well, thank you. Well, speaking of strategy, I was living in Europe, and when I wanted to retire as a from ballet and go to Broadway, I thought this is how I can finish my degree because on Broadway, you have your days free except for Wednesday when you do a matinee. But otherwise, I could be in college during the day and do my show at night. And that's what I ended up doing. I went to New York. Fortunately, I was fortunate enough to book Broadway shows just the way I planned to, because not everyone does that. A lot of people say they're going to go to New York and make it and do a show, but some of them have been there for 20 years and never did a Broadway show.
Or they end up on cruise ships or out
Or
in
yeah, whatever to pay the
out,
bills.
out on tour or in regional theater in Idaho. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Absolutely, yes, but you're absolutely right. You know, because
Yeah.
they at some point they're like, okay, this Broadway thing isn't working, but there are all these other gigs. I'm going to
But
take.
you still have to be in New York, do you not, to get those tours and get those gigs on ships and all that? Don't they cast
Well,
out of New York? Now I think
yes,
it's Chicago too, though, I believe it.
yeah. I mean, they do cast some of those things out of L.A., Chicago, New York, but most of them do cast out of New York. A lot of regional theater cast out of New York.
One of the things I was really curious about, you had talked about what you learned touring the world and going to these capitals all over the world, and what you learned about the people, the cultures, how many languages do you speak, by the way?
Well, I am comfortable in French, Spanish, and my German is not as good as the French and Spanish, and then English, of course.
Mhm. Well, when
Which
you
my
pronounced the name of the Spanish company, your accent sounded pretty good.
Oh yeah, no, I would say that my Spanish is not bad.
Yeah. How long were you with that company, España?
Just 1 year.
Okay,
But I
okay.
spoke Spanish before I went there.
Okay,
Yes.
so what did you learn? I mean, just broadly, generally, what did you take away from those experiences?
Well, I learned to, first of all, not judge a book by its cover and to be open-minded. I also learned to be more of a critical thinker and to be more inquisitive about things going on around me. I learned a lot about myself. And as a dancer, I learned how to find myself within someone else's work, if that makes sense. Because what often happens, especially if you're ballet classically trained as a ballet dancer, we are more like instruments without a voice, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But like for example, dancing in Europe, working with William Forsythe when I was in the Frankfurt Ballet, he at one point approached me after a performance and let me know that watching me on stage, he saw himself, but what he wanted to see was me.
Mhm.
And I'll break that down because what in essence he wanted to see is that, well, what I have become accustomed to doing as a classically trained dancer is to do exactly as I was told. No gray areas. It's this and only this, no extra anything, just this. And working with someone like William Forsythe, he gave me the freedom to be myself within his work. And ballet doesn't often allow for that to happen. Classical ballet, that is.
Does that mean that you follow the choreography as set to a T? You don't deviate from it. It's like popular singers, take a classic song and they will improvise on the melody.
Yes.
Drives me crazy because I'm a purist. But
Yeah, so that's it. And ballet is for purists, classical ballet, I should say. And
yeah,
so that's the way you're taught. And you
right.
have that mentality. So when you get to a place where you can loosen up and have the freedom to discover yourself, you don't know how to do that. Like an opera singer would probably have a difficult time trying to rap, for example.
Exactly. I've heard plenty of opera singers who try to cross over. It doesn't work because they're trained to
Yeah,
a certain way, and
absolutely.
it sounds
And it's
false. It's yeah,
And
not.
that's the same with a classical ballet dancer. If they go from classical ballet to trying to do hip hop, even though, they may pick up the steps and you
Yeah,
compare that to someone else who's never had classical
yes,
ballet, it's going to look wrong.
yeah,
Even
yeah,
me as a person of African descent, if I take certain dance movement classes like African class,
sure.
I will look like there's no African in my heritage whatsoever because of
Interesting.
the way I've been trained. I'm so classical, I'm so upright, I'm so pulled up that even if I try to let go, I've been trained so well, if you want to look at it that way, that it's hard for me to let go of that.
Well, this is a really good time to talk about what I have come to over the years covering ballet and modern dance, contemporary dance, that you can transition from one to the other because there are elements of ballet and modern dance. And I just absolutely love that, the fact that there's fluidity and that you could do both. So, what you're doing at Butler, are you teaching ballet and other forms of dance at the same time, or just ballet?
Well, I was hired to teach ballet during the pandemic. They realized from my resume that I could also teach jazz because we only have one jazz teacher, but we have many ballet teachers and we have 100 some odd students. So when we needed to make the classes smaller, that's where they asked me to start teaching jazz. And then that morphed into musical theater. So now in the fall, I teach a musical theater course to the level two.
And what
And
does a musical theater course entail?
well, I had carte blanche to create it however I wanted to. And I decided that I would have them experience everything that they would need to know if they ever wanted to do musical theater. So I teach them repertoire from Broadway musicals that I've done, or some that I might just learn, or that I might have choreographed. Like, for example, I choreographed the theater productions Pippin a couple years ago. And so I give the students some of the rep that I created from Pippin in the style of Bob Fosse. So I introduce them to Broadway choreographers like Bob Fosse and Michael Bennett. So these are people that I've either worked for or with, or I've experienced their work. And so I feel like I have an insight.
Those kids are so lucky. Oh my
Why,
goodness.
thank you. And then
No,
I
I mean,
also give them audition preparation information, like how to walk in the room, because you're being judged the moment you walk in that door.
yeah, auditioning technique.
Yeah. So I teach them those things.
They all have starry. I did. I was a theater student once, and I had these starry notions of like, going off to New York, packing my tap shoes, and getting on a bus and going to New York. But then when you get there, so many people are disillusioned. It's horrific. So that you give them practical advice, direction based on your own experiences. That's remarkable.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. So they know how to walk in a room and they know that they're being evaluated from the moment they walk in to the moment they walk out. I teach them how to respectfully communicate with the accompanist because you want to be nice to the accompanist because they could ruin your audition. Giving proper instructions and then also thanking the people in the room. And
What do you tell them about nerves?
well, what I tell them about nerves is I try to remind them that they're doing what they love, and auditioning should be no different from taking the best class that they've ever taken. So if they treat it as such and not concern themselves with things that are out of their control, hopefully
Hmm.
they'll keep the nerves at bay because they can't control what the people are going to say or do behind the table. They're going to do whatever they're going to do.
And
That's
they
none of your business.
and what about the idea of you can't take it personally? They're looking for maybe a certain look
Oh
or
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would. That's what I was going to say afterwards. Is that you have to understand that the moment you leave the room, if you've done everything in that room that you wanted to do, that's all you are in control of. And if you don't get the job, it doesn't mean that you were not good enough. It just may possibly mean that you weren't what they were looking for. Because especially with Broadway, it's all about type. So I've said to them that I have fallen on my face in auditions, not literally, but like in my opinion, I didn't do as well as I knew I could have, and I've still gotten the job because I was what they were looking for. And they kind of knew me also. But at the same time, I've also gone into auditions where I wasn't what they were looking for. And I danced circles around everyone in the room. And it was even mentioned to me by the people in the room competing for the same role that I was. And then they were like struck dumb when I was like eliminated. Because that's the other thing. A lot of times with Broadway, they will type you out. There's this, like they used to just line you up and you wouldn't even have a chance to perform if they didn't think you were the right type. They didn't want to waste your time or theirs, so they wouldn't even let you dance. Like they would just say number 3, number 8, number 12, thank you, because you're not the type.
That's
Then
so
at some
chorus line
point,
right there. Don't you
yeah,
agree?
absolutely. Because that was back then when I did audition for a chorus line, they were still typecasting.
Yeah.
Now, because of laws and people being sued and whatever,
Yeah.
they're not allowed to let you know that
Yeah.
they're typecasting, but they still do it. So they'll let you dance.
This discussion is a great segue because I really want to spend some time talking to you about representation. I've been doing this podcast for a year, and as a person of color, as a Latino, I'm grateful to have a platform so I can discuss such things as representation. African Americans, Latinos, Asians, our stories being told, our faces being shown so that, young people out there can see people who look like them. And just anecdotally, and just from my observation, I began to see that, well, the performing arts have always been in the vanguard of social change. And, I began to see performers on stage, things that were starting to turn, maybe locally at least, the IRT and Phoenix and others. Brian Fonseca, he produced plays with African American themes and stories. He produced the first all Latino cast and started doing off Broadway stuff by Latino writers and such. Actually, I was in one of them. So, representation was more than just a buzzword. There were people here even who were doing it. And so then, of course, Black Lives Matter. My observation has been that finally people behind the scenes too started to be represented. Costume designers, lighting designers, they're very much in demand from what I could tell. Artists in general, I consider to have been a trailblazer. And in the
Uh-huh.
ballet world, you and your colleagues like Misty, and now there are several others who are gaining a lot of exposure and are coming into their own. But you were one of the trailblazers. How was that for you? What kind of barriers did you have to overcome in that world?
It was really difficult because, like Misty, and at the same time, unlike
Sorry,
Misty, I
Misty
mean,
Copeland, for people who are
Misty,
listening who have no idea who that is. Tell
yeah,
them.
Misty Copeland. Yeah, because you mentioned her name before, so I thought I'd go back to Misty because she's a friend of mine and I know her struggles. But unlike Misty, we didn't have the internet when I first started. So a lot of my trailblazing, and it wasn't even an initiative because I wasn't even thinking about trailblazing. I was just trying to exist in a white space. But most importantly, it wasn't until I became the first African American male dancer at the Pennsylvania Ballet and being interviewed that I reflected on that, because fortunately for me at Pennsylvania Ballet, I was treated like a dancer, not a black dancer. It wasn't until I became a member of the company that I was all of a sudden a black dancer
Mhm.
because of all the interviews and the things. So I say fortunately and unfortunately, because at that moment during the interview process, I was asked, what is it like to be the first black, whatever. And then I thought I had to think. I was like, that's true. I mean, not that I didn't know I was black, but like all of a sudden I was made to feel
Mhm.
black. I had to think about being black. But then I all of a sudden felt this pressure, because there's a pressure in being the one, the first, the only. There's a burden because once it was brought to my attention, I had to think about a community of people that I'm representing. I couldn't just be me like the rest of the other white dancers on stage. Their race or their color or their ethnicity or their religion, none of that came into play when they were dancing. So they
And
could make
that's
a
and
mistake.
that's a great definition for what privilege means.
Absolutely. So whatever they ended up doing, it was individualized. With me, it was I had the whole race behind me. So
Mm.
like, oh, you see black people are not equipped for whatever, or, like not me, but like all black
Yes,
people. And that's what representation, being the one and only or the first or whatever, it's that burden that we understand as that person.
that pressure, you have to be better than them because the spotlight is on you. People want to
Yeah.
bring you down or, you know,
Yeah, absolutely. You
yeah.
can't slip. You can't afford to make any mistakes. You have to be perfect. And everyone, we all know that there's no such thing as perfection for anyone. Even, but bottom line, you're constantly reminded. And so as a result of that, I was offered a contract to join the New York City Ballet. And when I was offered that contract, I was actually reminded that the other black dancer at the time was leaving. And so it reminded me of that burden that I didn't want to take on because I thought, well, this is tokenism
Yeah.
personified. And so I am being offered this contract as a token because the other one is leaving. And what would that do to me psychologically if I accept this contract? Because everyone, all of my peers, would not recognize my talent and my worth. They would just think that, oh, the only reason he got in the company was because the other one was leaving. They had to replace the other black guy. No one would be looking at my talent or all that I might have achieved to get to that position. So,
They would have resented you.
yeah, especially the ones who might not have gotten into the company that thought they
Exactly.
should have been. And that, because a lot of times when people don't get what they think they deserve and they see someone of color who's considered a token getting what they probably deserve if we weren't taking color or race or whatever into play, then their resentment is, well, the only reason I didn't get in, because that's easier. It's easier to blame anything but your lack of ability on the reason for you not getting a job.
Because of this conversation we have, we can't overlook the fact that, and again, it's for me, this discussion is not about, well, it is, it's inevitable, it is politics, what's happening right now. The executive order to do away with DEI and all the government agencies. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's such a step back. Think about it.
It is. No, absolutely.
It's
Because if you think
shocking.
about
It's
it,
depressing.
it's
It's demoralizing.
and all of this is based on fear. It's like, what do we lose if we give people of the global majority the opportunity, an equal opportunity to achieve things that they are not able to achieve because of all the barriers that we've created for them? What's going to be taken away from us?
You know, in our own backyard, it's my belief that my purpose is promoting the arts and artists. But in view of all of that's going on, I feel that, well, what can I control and what can't I? You brought up that before. So I can only take care of my own little corner of the world and do what I can to foster peace, harmony, and love. Do you feel the same way?
I used to, but now as an educator, I know that there's so much more that I can do.
Yes, of
And
course.
that's, I developed a course here at Butler. It's a social justice and diversity course. And so,
Really?
um, yes, and
Wow.
fortunately, we're a private institution. So at the moment, anyway, the government is not coming after me for teaching the things that I teach because I'm letting the students know about all the things that have been whitewashed in our history.
That's
And
fabulous.
I'm giving them the opportunity to become more empathetic in their
Mhm.
lens when they're looking at the world and to
And
question everything.
and I take it that Butler recruited you, and hopefully, and it sounded to me in our first interview that they did it for the right reasons because you were talented, you were experienced, and that was the primary reason why you're on that campus and being a teacher. So, having said that, has Butler also on their own, is your program diverse? Students, faculty, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yes. I mean, because you may or may not know, but Butler University was founded by an abolitionist, and his mission way back then was to create a safe space for people of color.
Did not know that. Hmm.
Yeah, to have the opportunity, because back when he founded Butler University, Black people were not allowed to attend universities or college. I mean, they may have had a few, but they were not able to integrate. And that was one of his missions.
I lived in Irvington for a while, and that's where Butler started. Now that's all coming back, that history.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, as
So,
a matter of fact, there was a sorority, Black sorority founded here at Butler University, Sigma Gamma Rho, and their house was like, I think, right down the street from the Grand
yeah, the Grand Dragon of the
of the Ku Klux
that
Klan.
house is still there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
We have limited time. There's so much that I want to talk to you about, but let's talk about this idea of your students. You said, I've never been a parent, but I feel like these students are my kids, right? Do you still
yeah,
feel that way?
I do. As a
Mhm.
matter of fact, I reiterated that not long ago. Now, especially because I'm creating, I'm choreographing, and I'm also imparting onto them a lot of this research that I'm doing for the social justice and diversity course that I'm teaching. And to see them receive the information with open arms, and they're curious, they are inquisitive, they're becoming critical thinkers, and it makes me proud. It makes me realize that,
Oh, I
just
can
like a parent,
imagine.
that my work is not in vain.
Yeah. So, have you been able to track? I'm sure you stay in touch with your students who move on. Is
Yes.
anybody on Broadway stages currently that you've taught?
There's one student who she's definitely doing Broadway tours. She actually came back to, she was at Clues not long ago in Willy Wonka and the
Yeah,
Chocolate
the
Factory.
Chocolate Factory, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had a former student in that.
How about ballet? Anybody in companies around the country?
Yes, yes. Almost all of our students end up in some company. It may not be the company of their dream,
Of
or it
course.
may not be a huge company, but I guess the biggest companies that our dancers are in, not necessarily ballet, but one of our dancers just got into Paul Taylor.
Mhm.
Another one just got into Twyla Tharp's company in New York. So that's big time. Twyla
Yes.
Tharp and Paul Taylor.
You've had Butler students have been apprentices in DK too, haven't you?
Well, there have been students who were offered contracts, and we have a few students who have gone to Indianapolis Ballet. We have one who's
Oh,
currently
that's
there,
right. Yes.
Gabriela Gutierrez.
Yes.
She's
Yes.
doing really well because I'm down at Indy Ballet restaging my ballet called Dixon's Groove to the music of Rob Dixon. And Gabriela is one of the dancers. And she
Oh,
did the lead role in the ballet that I'm restaging at Indy Ballet.
when does that play? That to
It's
ballet?
February, I believe it's Valentine's Day, the 14th, 15th, and 16th.
Oh, I would love to see that.
They did it during the pandemic, but they didn't have a live audience because of the restrictions. So this is going to be their premiere with a live audience.
For anybody listening who have not yet experienced dance, ballet, contemporary, modern, whatever you jazz dance, what would you say to them? I always make the point you guys have seen it your whole lives. You just have never connected that movies, television, all
Yes,
those people dancing behind all those pop singers, they all have training, right?
absolutely. Yes, yes, yes.
So, what would you say to people in general about coming to the theater, though, to see where it all began?
Well, it can be life changing because being in a theater, experiencing live theater, live art, it could be cathartic. And when I say life changing, like I didn't know that I would be interested in doing the things that I'm doing until I was exposed to it. So once you're seeing these things, I mean, it transforms you. I mean, like there's always something that one can relate to. And when something pulls at your heartstrings, it's kind of contagious. You want more of it. Like if you see that people are having a wonderful time, you want to have a good time too. And sometimes the music moves you to want to move. and or you might be inspired by what you're seeing, and if they're doing their job, it makes everyone think that it's something that they can do and they
Hmm.
want to do it because it's just like, oh my god, they look like they're having so much fun. I want to be a part of that fun. And dance, turning it back to dance, dance is so good for your health. Even if you don't want to do it as a profession, it's great for your brain. As you start to become a person of a certain age, like just keeping that motor skill of retention, because all the information, learning combinations, and then just moving. Music is also healing as well. So, hearing music, moving to the music, allowing the music to move you. And if it's, like a straight play, as in, like not a musical, there's just so much information out there that can just take you on a journey that you didn't realize you needed in your life.
Hmm.
And also the sense of community, being in sharing that space with other people and receiving that kind of energy collectively.
And it is a safe space. I always say to people, you don't know the politics of the person sitting next to you. So it's a play,
Absolutely.
the power of music and dance and the performing arts to help us all find a common denominator that's positive and inspiring. So, thank you
Yes.
so much for giving me your time. I just really enjoy chatting with you every time I see you, and I'm sure we'll run into each other again. And so, again, I admire your work and I wish you nothing but success with your students and your work going forward.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for having me on your podcast. This means a lot to me, and I look forward to our next encounter. Come and see the Midwinter Dance Concert. It's at the Schrott Center for the Arts, and
Love that
or
theater, and it would be my pleasure to do so.
thank you. Take care.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official neighborhood newsletter for 16 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, and make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.